discovered Amor Towles' Gentleman in Moscow during the pandemic, as a book recommended by the Duchess of Cornwall. And for once, I did not hesitate to read a story of Russia. The time spent reading it had a very distinct aroma that feels very much present even when the details start to fade. A world I was somewhat familiar with through my own family's history on the other side of the Iron Curtain, but that I had the pleasure of discovering from the perspective of an American writer. Join me in a journey of the senses through my review of A Gentleman in Moscow. The images of interiors come from the Jacquemart-André Museum in Paris, an inspiration for memories of elegant Russian decor. Count Alexander Rostov lives 32 years of house arrest in the Metropole Hotel in Moscow, as he puts his noble spirit to the highest test possible, being true to himself in a world intent on crushing him. The soundtrack going on in my head while reading was very eclectic. Balalaikas and violins, rhythm and feeling, everything combined depending on the chapter. But the one that held the spotlight front and center was Tchaikovsky's Barcarolla. Inspired by the traditional folk song of Venetian gondoliers, the Barcarolla was a very popular piece of music in the Romantic period. Its rhythm was reminiscent of the gondolier's stroke, and with a moderate tempo of small and regular waves, it has a very delicate feel. Russia has given many great composers to the world of classical music, but the one that I enjoy the most is, without the shadow of a doubt, Tchaikovsky. His exceptional sense of harmony is a testimony of his love for Mozart and of his highly sensitive nature. It is said that Tchaikovsky's main concern was how his music impacted his listeners on an aesthetic level, what his listeners experienced on an emotional or visceral level. And his Barcarolla has, in my humble opinion, the vibration of Count Alexander Rostov. An elegant, silky musical texture, a discreet yet unmistakable personality, and the effortless ability to make you dance while standing still. Revolted, in total admiration, intrigued, and seduced. the Russian old world aristocracy and the revolutionary Bolsheviks divide and coexist in a story of deep meaning for me. I think the strongest feeling I had was of relief that someone else, on the other side of the world, has the same vision as I have over events that seem to lose their meaning as generations forget, distort, or embellish to their advantage. The novel reviews and puts into perspective many basic human values, since they are the first ones to be dislocated during revolutions. One that I hold dearest is the concept and quality of elegance. A word that has suffered many transformations and reinterpretations in the last century or so, and seems to have kept mostly its aesthetic value nowadays. In a world determined to right the wrongs of discrimination and free every human being from the tyranny of the majority, some moral concepts seem to be confused with censorship and fall as collateral damage in the greater battle for freedom. One such example is my friend, the Elegance. Dictionaries are slowly starting to emphasize its richness of design definition and forget or place in fourth or fifth place its dignified gracefulness. Some more traditionalist French dictionaries still place in first place its broad definition: quality of someone distinguished by its taste, its choice in clothing, the grace of its manners. Were we to conduct a survey on the streets of the greater cities in the world, I believe most people would associate elegance with aesthetically pleasing things, mostly fashion-related. And in doing so, they would automatically put any elegant person in the wealthy category. This has created gaps in society, and it has partly pushed people towards the exact opposite, in an attempt to affirm their value despite their lack of means. As you can see, I'm very fond of elegance, and I found my joy in the following quote. The Count took pride in wearing a well-tailored jacket, but he took greater pride in knowing that a gentleman's presence was best announced by his bearing, his remarks, and his manners, not by the cut of his coat. Many years ago, while binging on a famous TV series, a guest appearance of Mikhail Baryshnikov has forever changed my view of Russian tea. The simple yet unusual phrase, "We sweeten our tea with black cherries," has stayed with me long after, though I never tried it before reading the novel. The perfect opportunity to indulge in a St. Petersburg blend of Chinese black tea infused with aromas of red fruit, bergamot and caramel. But traditionally a simple black tea would suffice. The shiny cherries look like precious gemstones, ready to transform a classic cup of tea into a Russian experience. And a delicious one, I promise. There is a perfect balance between the sweet sourness of the cherries and a deep black tea flavor. You cannot compare it with any other tea. Stirring it, I feel like I'm bringing to life all the characters in the novel around my table. It seems too easy to choose the Count as my favorite of all the characters, but I cannot turn away from the embodiment of so many values I regard so highly. If elegance is already covered, maybe the second thing I most appreciate in him is the power to adapt, or dare I say, the intelligence to adapt without betraying himself in the process. There is a wonderful phrase in the book that says, "If a man does not master his circumstances, then he is bound to be mastered by them." And this got me thinking to a very obvious parallel between the Count's house arrest and the lockdowns imposed all over the world by the recent pandemic. You could argue that our circumstances were impossible to master, since they were imposed upon us by figures of authority. Yet there is one thing that no pandemic, no political regime, and no revolution have managed to control or censor: our inner world. Count Rostov's story is the perfect example that spirits can be crushed only if they are ignored by their own master, but also that a strong spirit does not equal a strong head, a big mouth, or a tough fist. He had said that our lives are steered by uncertainties, many of which are disruptive or even daunting, but that if we persevere and remain generous of heart, we may be granted a moment of lucidity, a moment in which all that has happened to us suddenly comes into focus as a necessary course of events, even as we find ourselves on the threshold of the life we had been meant to lead all along. I hear Tchaikovsky in the background. I taste the black cherries on the tip of my tongue. But what do I smell? Researching the Romanovs is a never-ending adventure, and one that deserves my time and attention. But for now, I'm most interested in Alexandra Fyodorova, the last Empress of Russia, and her preference when it comes to fragrance. Since French was the language most used at the Russian court, I was expecting to find the famous Guerlain or Caron as her favorite. But seeing that she did not speak French when she got married to the Tsar, and that she struggled with it until the end, her choice of an English brand seems more natural. In the writings of Lily Den, a close friend of the Empress, I found the answer to my question. Apropos of her fondness for lilac and lilies of the valley, I may mention that the Empress loved all flowers, her especial favorites being lilies, magnolias, wisteria, rhododendrons, freesias and violets. A love of flowers is usually akin to a love of perfumes, and the Empress was no exception to the rule. She generally used Atkinson's white rose. It was, as she said, clean as a perfume and infinitely sweet as an eau de toilette. The perfume was created in 1860, but is no longer produced in its original form, that was said to have powdered notes of white rose and a touch of bergamot on a canvas of white musk. My olfactory curiosity is now satisfied, and my immersion into the Russian universe I'm compiling is a success. So many life lessons converging to a common place. The fact that being noble does not reside in material possessions, and ultimately not even in a title or the family you're born in. It is a constant exercise in good thoughts, good deeds, and good words. A profound persuasion that treating others with respect is the first proof of respecting yourself, and the never-ending pursuit of living a life of purpose and contentment. History is subjective, so I have no expectation of accuracy from historical fiction. However, keeping in mind that there is no absolute truth in any situation, the novel has impressive historical value, not only in facts, but mostly in psychological profiles of the time. So that's one reason to read it. But if you're more interested in the story than the history, I think A Gentleman in Moscow could surprise you in a different way. Taking a step back from our concerns is always easier said than done. But maybe, while reading this novel, your perspective of hardship will change. And if you're lucky, the spark of inspiration to find joy no matter the context will start to glow. The onions thoroughly caramelized, the pork slowly braised, and the apricots briefly stewed. The three ingredients came together in a sweet and smoky medley that simultaneously suggested the comfort of a snowed-in tavern and the jungle of the gypsy tambourine. All readers of the novel surely remember an episode around page 95 involving a young couple, a Latvian stew, and a bottle of Georgian wine. It is impossible to resist the urge of finding the recipe and getting to work. Since the book was first published in 2016, I was lucky enough to find plenty of resources online, even the original recipe of the author. I ended up combining several recipes I found online and adding a personal twist, so I leave the details for my website. What I can tell you is that it turned out better than I could have imagined. A classic stew at first sight, it reveals a depth of aromas with every new bite. The subtle sweetness of the dried apricots and the tanginess of the prunes are like a harmonious undertone in a painting that honors the main character. Melt in your mouth pork. You could serve it with some mashed potatoes, but I went for the simple version of fresh bread. I'm sorry for the vegetarians. Well, in fact, I'm not sorry. It was too delicious to regret anything about it. But I'll make it up to you next week, I promise. Thank you for joining my Russian-inspired ritual. This is how I read, engaging my senses, freeing my imagination, immersing myself in a story, and in the end, feeling like I have lived a whole life and a different one in just a few days. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. Drop by in the comments and we'll continue the story. Until next time, enjoy your reading and your rituals.